Hi, this is Robert Kiyosaki, and you're listening to Capital Hacking. This is the most important thing you can listen to today.
Here's the one.
I have a dream.
With great power comes great responsibility. I could do this all day.
This is it. Don't get scared now.
They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom.
Cinderella story out of nowhere.
It's in the hole. That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Capital Hacking begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the big show. Hey, Josh McCown here, the lovely, illustrious John Edwin. How you doing, buddy?
I am great. I'll tell you what, Jon Vroman, he is so dynamic. And what he didn't actually tell you in the show was, I think he was voted multiple years in a row as the number one college speaker, the number one university speaker in the country.
Yeah, I saw that on his LinkedIn that he's a professional motivational speaker. It's self-evident why, right? So this Front Row Dads episode is gonna blow your mind actually with what is possible when you put your heart to it. You rallied the troops. This person clearly has superhuman talents. He has supernatural talents, this guy, to rally the troops, to have clarity of vision, and to really the stamina. I mean, 20 years of operating that wonderful charity. And now he's helping hundreds and hundreds of men be tremendous front row dads. So I can't wait to share his story.
And you guys are going to learn why he is one of my favorite people in the world. Let's get
it. I did too. I learned why. This is exciting. I just got to let you get the party started, Mr. John. Go for it.
You know, it's so cool that how everything goes full circle, because the first podcast I was ever on was the Front Row Foundation podcast. And I drove over to Johnny's house in New Jersey and sat in the basement while he interviewed me about my life. And here we are, I'm going to say 7, probably 8 years later, where I have you now on our show. And I'm getting an opportunity to interview you. So without further ado, we have Jon Vroman on. Johnny, can you give us a little background on who you are?
Yeah, man. Well, first and foremost, married, dad, living in Austin. Been with my wife, Tatiana, for about 18 years. I have a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old, 2 boys. And so when I'm not doing that, I hang out with other dads. And we have a community called Front Row Dads. So online and in-person events. And then, you know, the other thing I would add is what would be interesting and different. My favorite thing to do is the thing that I haven't done yet. That's what I'll leave as a personal thing.
How do you know what's your favorite thing to do then?
Yeah, variety, man. It's just anything that's new. And if I haven't done
that's
it,
what you mean.
I'm most thrilled about that.
You know, but let me take us back for a second, because John he's a very humble guy, very, very accomplished man. And John and I met, you know, I'm 46 now. I'm going to say we met when I was 20 or 21. And you were working with Vector Marketing, Cutco, that I sold through college and you sold through college. And you were working with Johnny Kane, and you were the promotions manager, just crushing it. But then you did something very different, and you started your own foundation because you were at a concert. And I'm going to let you actually tell that story of the Front Row Foundation, because if you're listening to this, John, he didn't just create a foundation that touched a few people. It touched the world, and it was powerful.
Well, thank you, man. That was such a great era, and I'm so proud of the work we did, that you did, because, you know, I'll get to that part of the story. But here's the quick version, and then if you want to go into any more detail, we can. So yeah, it was summer 2005. I was at a Jason Mraz concert in downtown Philly. I was in the back of the venue. I was looking down to the front row, and I just saw these women having the time of their life. Like, it was a lot of people that were sitting down, but these 4 or 5 women were standing up and singing. And I thought, man, it's just so interesting how people will have the same experience, right? There was many people in that venue watching Jason, but everybody was having a different experience. And these women were choosing to go all in. They were participating fully, you know, and I thought, those women are living life in the front row, is how I said it to myself. So just take that and put it aside for a minute. That was a thought that I had, but it meant nothing beyond that thought in that moment. And then it was a little while longer. A good friend of mine and I were taking a run down by the Schuylkill River. And we were having this conversation about what makes you come alive in life.
Hey, everybody, it's Robert Helms, host of the Real Estate Guys radio program. And when you're not listening to our show, make sure you're tuned to Capital Hacking. You're going to dig it.
We were talking about your greatest fear and your greatest joy. And I was like, man, my greatest joys are moments with my friends. My greatest memories are the ones where we're like, remember when we went here? Remember when we did that? Remember, it was all experience based. And then we talked about our greatest fear. And my fear was getting to the end of my life and feeling like I didn't make the most of it. My greatest fear was squandering the opportunity of, making the most of every day. And then the conversation led to, how do you feel about giving in the world, your level of contribution? How do you feel about making a difference? What if we raise money for a charity sometime? What good could we do? And that conversation came up. So this is all just two dudes on a run, right? And then the conversation turned to, what if we started our own charity? What if you started your own movement? What would that be? And it was like the words just rolled out of our mouths. It was Front Row Foundation. We take kids and adults who are facing the end of their life, and we help them create the best experience of their life. Our greatest fear, our greatest joy is combined. And we knew that if you combine your greatest fear and your greatest joy, you're going to find a lot of power there, a lot of momentum, a lot of energy. And that's exactly what was needed, because for the next 20 years, we raised millions of dollars. We sent many people to their, favorite live events, concerts, sporting events, all different types of things, comedy shows, Disney on Ice. It didn't matter what it was. And we did it with our friends. And so we turned from, going to bars and shutting down bars late at night and having stories to tell that way, to throwing gala events for fundraisers where we'd have 400 people show up and raise money for charity. And it was so meaningful. So we just entered a new era of our life and found a new way to party with a purpose and make a difference in the lives of others. And Jon, I want to credit you, man, for, very early on, you introduced us to Lauren, whose daughter, Sophie, was a recipient of Front Row Foundation. And I told Sophie's story for years because she was a young girl who was a big fan of Kelly Clarkson. And you introduced us, and then we ended up sending this little girl to go see Kelly Clarkson. She got to meet her backstage, and it turned into one of our most told stories about the impact this made on this young girl and her family. And I was just hooked at the feeling of doing good for other people. And then, there's other things that spun off of that, and we get into that if you want, but that's kind of the story of how that came to be. And also your involvement in it, which I'm super grateful for. And you've always been an advocate. You've always helped raise money. You've always supported us and cheered us on and lifted us up, as you do for so many.
It was really cool. And Josh, I know you're chomping at the bit.
I'm dying. This is so wonderful. I can't even imagine. This is your lives, guys. This is legend.
So I get a call. We're going way back now, right? I get a call from John Kane. He's such an advocate for you and the Front Row and everything that he's involved in. And he's like, hey, John and Jamie are doing this crazy thing. They're like running 100, I don't know how many miles you're running, but from somewhere to New York or whatever. And I'm like, what are they thinking? He's like, oh, they're doing it for charity. I'm like, where are they? They can run along a highway? Like, what's that going to look like? And, I start asking like actual detailed questions. He's like, I don't know, but they're just raising money. I'm like, okay, well, what do we do? He's like, well, there's going to be this event. It's going to be a beef and beer. And it was like, people say beef and beer, and sometimes they're fancy. This was a legit beef and beer. This was like pitchers of beer and roast beef sandwiches. And he's like, it's going to be at this firehouse in South Jersey. And I'm like, all right, just tell me when and where. Christina and I will be there. And, I don't remember if you had dueling pianos, which you had at one of them, or maybe it was a comedian or magician, something. But it was low key, but everybody in that room was so excited. Mm-hmm. And we went from that room to, I don't know, 8 or 10 years later, seeing you on NBC, the Today Show talking about the Front Row. And I'm sitting there and I'm seeing you on the TV, and I'm like, holy shit. Like this whole thing started with a run at a firehouse in New Jersey. And here we are.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a very cool time, man. And, when I look back on that, Jon, what I feel is so much pride in good people coming together to do something meaningful to support others. And it's what we did time and time again. It was such a beautiful testimony to the hearts of the community. And it was definitely not a Jon Vroman thing. It was many people who were excited to do something meaningful to support those who were facing very difficult times. And you were always at the forefront of that, man. Really headlining, cheering on. I remember your little small fundraisers to stepping up for the big fundraisers and everything in between. It was really, really cool, man. I have so many stories. We have very limited time here, but it's fun for me to say out loud that there are more stories that I'm so proud of that we could get through in the next day or two if we recorded it.
Oh, wow. Now, is that, fast forward a little bit, is that foundation still the core of your operations today, and Front Row Dads
It is the
part of
perfect
it?
question. It is the perfect question. And here's what I'll do. I'm going to use the answer to this question to tell you kind of why I think Jon and yourself, Josh, wanted to talk today primarily was to talk about Front Row Dads and how, this Front Row Foundation somehow turned into now a men's group of fathers who are supporting each other in life. And I'll tell you, without getting into the weeds, I will tell you the big picture. Front Row Foundation was doing fantastic, right? Raising a lot of money. We had written a book called The Front Row Factor. I was speaking all over the place about living life in the front row. So there's two entities here, right? There's a for-profit called Front Row Global, which was my business where I would get paid to speak. And there was a nonprofit called Front Row Foundation, two separate entities. People would hire me to come in as a speaker. That's how I put food on the table for my family. And then I was doing Front Row Foundation because I loved it, right? Just giving to the charity. And what happened was I had landed my biggest speech ever. It was a $35,000 keynote for 18,000 people. My book was doing great. The charity was doing great. My business was doing great. And my kids, a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time. And my book had become a bestseller. We just passed a couple hundred reviews on Amazon. I was thrilled, right? And my wife pulled me aside and said, "You're more of a moment maker for the rest of the world than you are for our family." And she was right. That's exactly what was happening. I happened to be a businessman with a family. I was so busy trying to show my kids how to make it in the world and how to do good in the world. I was like, I'm going to show my kids what it's like to be a good human. But in doing so, I actually wasn't at home with my kids. I wasn't being a legendary husband. I was not being a great dad. I was talking about it. I was showing them what to do. And then what happened was I started Front Row Dads to get the help that I needed. I was like, I need other men in my life who are ambitious, who are driven, who are entrepreneurs, who are business owners, who don't want to hide at work anymore under the banner of for my family, right? So I got everybody together and I said, hey, we're going to talk about what it means to have both, to be epic in business and epic at home. And that's what we did. And then what that led to, here's the grand conclusion. I shut down the charity about 18 months ago, consciously and lovingly. We just said no. It was a great 2 decades. We're so proud of the work we did. We celebrated all of our accomplishments, and then we closed the doors because at that point I was giving so much to the charity that I wasn't giving it to my family. And so we could have a whole conversation around all of that, but that's the spirit of what happened. And it was a beautiful closure. And the lesson in that for me is sometimes we need to say no to the things that light us up so that we can say yes to our family. And we can't always hide behind, it's a good thing for the world if it's not a good thing for our family.
Heavy. That's heavy. So in a way, it's beautiful. I mean, obviously, it's admirable that you put first things first and you live by principles.
That's the thing I'm proud of. That's
right.
No,
you should be. Yeah. And it's also it feels damning a little to me. You know what I mean? As a person on the other side of this, where my heart and soul feels invested fully in the operations of a business. Now we have a lot of children, and so we do a lot of things. But I definitely feel judging myself. I'm like, I'm not living up to these kinds of standards. You know what I mean? That Jon's describing. How do people deal with that tension, that internal tension that they want to live up to?
The first thing is saying it out loud, like you are, Josh. Like it's first to say, hey, it's tough. And it's hard to balance those two things because look, as a man, you want to love your work. You want to make a difference in the world. That's so important, right? The key is, can we be honest about what level we're doing that? And rarely are you going to get it right. You might be home too much and people are like, hey man, you need to go back to work, dad. Like your wife's kicking you out. I think you're home a little too much. You need to get back to your mission. That's happened for guys who think they swing the pendulum to the other side. And then they go back to work and they end up spending a little too much time there. But I think if we have self-awareness and we have brotherhood that can actually be honest with us and hold us accountable, and if we have guys that are good examples of what it looks like, right? And I could just, my friend Tim, who just left my house this morning, bought mobile home parks, basically retired before the age of 30, and was a dad for 8 years. And then his wife was like, I think you need to go back to work, get a mission. And so he did. And then he found things that he likes to do. And I've watched him take his family to Europe every summer and travel. And, it's just, he's a good example of somebody who's constantly in the flow. He solved the money problem at one point. He has always, wrestled. He's got 5 children. So he's got his hands full. And I think that if you're around a bunch of ambitious guys, and you're talking about this routinely, opening up your calendar, showing your schedule, being honest with your crew, then they'll help you.
So Jon, interestingly enough, we're having this conversation because Josh and I just interviewed Robert Helms. That's going to hit our 400th episode, which is exciting. It's an amazing, amazing guy. But he was talking about his masterminds, specifically a goal-setting mastermind, and he was saying how all he does is facilitate it, and he makes sure there's nooks and crannies and places for people to sit down and dive deep. And I mentioned to him that I was in a mastermind, which was the first ever Front Row Dads event at the Constitution Center in Philly. But you and John Berghoff did such an amazing job facilitating that specific event where everyone had time. Like we had a booklet and we were answering questions and I was sitting by myself. And I remember this is one of the few times in my life that I have 2 hours to reflect on certain questions with no outside noise, no one talking to me, and just have time to sit with myself. And it was interesting because Robert Helms is like, yeah, I don't teach anything. All the answers are within you. You just need to take the time to answer the right questions. And that seminar, that mastermind that you had was so powerful. And it changed my life because of people that I met there and other paths that I've taken to this point. So first of all, thank you for that. And how many of those types of masterminds are you running a year? And what does Front Row Dads look like? So let's say we have probably plenty of listeners that are like, you know what? I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better father. How do I do that? So what does your program look like?
Yeah, it's very simple. We help men gather, somebody once said, they said, am I paying for friends? And I say, no, you can't pay for friends. Those you have to acquire through trust and honesty and being an epic human. But what you can pay for is for our team to organize events. You can pay for us to bring people together and pick dates and select topics and write interview questions. And that's what we will do. We will organize. We'll put it together, the back end and the systems, and we'll handle the admin. You handle the friendship part. So 300 plus men who are located all throughout the U.S. We are family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. That's the core value that aligns our group. And there's 3 things that we focus on throughout the year: the man, the family, the business. So yeah, we want you to succeed in business. Of course, we want you to make millions of dollars and, do all of that, what you want with that. Take care of your family, give it away, be good to the world. But we know that you as a man need to be great emotionally, physically. We know that you need brotherhood. We know that your marriage needs to be great and you need to have parenting strategies. And then we know that you need to win in business. So if we can figure out how to talk about those 3 things throughout the year, that's what we do. We have 4 big events that all men can gather throughout the year. Those are live events that most men fly in for and come spend 3 days with us. We also have other events, like we have a rite of passage trip that, father can take their child on right now that we've just announced. We have a father-son adventure that we just announced. So we have these different ways that men can get together. And just like in GoBundance, where they have pods, we have bands. So typically 4 to 8 members who get together and meet at some cadence. Sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's monthly, but they get together and they go deep. So we are a group of men who gather, guys who know they don't want to do it alone. They're curious, they want to take action, and they want to do it together as a team. We often say, like, together we go further, faster. So look, are these men capable? Can they do a lot on their own? Absolutely. Do they know that they'll get a lot further if they have 300 people who've got their back, who are cheering them on, who want to see them succeed? Absolutely. So that's what Front Row Dads is. And it's a podcast if somebody wanted to go listen and see if they, feel the vibe of what we do. We're always interviewing some fascinating people on the show, and legendary business owners, and also finding out, like, what was it like for them growing up? What was their dad like? How did it shape their life? And like, what is their view on parenting? So I usually do a 2-hour show, and I spend the first hour interviewing the guys about their views on parenting and fatherhood and their relationship to their dad. And then the second half about their business or whatever skill they're great at.
What a curious format, though, that you go that deep, because of course, so many, first of all, congratulations. I just think what you're doing is a contribution. I kind of want to hear a little more about the original foundation and the genesis, but let's stick with Front Row Dads for a moment. What you just described to your podcast, it sounds like what I imagine the result is that when people talk about their own father, there's usually a lot of fatherhood wounds, fathers. So I imagine the early part of the show is either, let's do a 1 out of 10. Out of 10, your last 10 guests, how many times was it that I was mentored and led, given a rite of passage, and became the man I am, which would be the positive, let's call it? And how many times out of 10 was it left us not really there? Maybe I had trauma from him. It made me who I am. Like, is it that his journey, his mentorship made me who I am, or in contrast to him, it made me who I am? How do you break the
It's always both.
Okay.
It's always both. But more so recently, it's been that the father has had a positive impact on their son's life. That's more often than not what's happened, which also in some ways can make sense as to why they are where they are in life right now, because they had a good father figure. But that's certainly not the case across the board. I mean, there are situations of fathers that were alcoholic, abusive, absent, like every scenario that you can imagine, that's also there. But there's unquestionably wounds. You can't escape that part of it of, hey, where did they fall short? And that's often the question I ask, like, where did they model some behavior that you're like, I'm going to do that when or I catch myself doing it now and I'm so proud of it. And then also, hey, where was that person, the warning? Hey, I'm never going to do that. So
beautiful.
Yeah. And generationally, I'll add this too, that I think this is probably well known, is that, last generation, a generation or two ago, the main mission was putting food on the table. There was less of a desire to be emotionally engaged with kids. That was a little bit more acceptable of just like, hey, I'm going to pay for the shit and then, provide it to my family. And I think that what we experience now is a higher level of engagement emotionally from dads.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I want to dive a little bit into this father-son trip that you had mentioned that happens with Front Row Dads. What does it look like?
Well, this will be our first year running it. So why don't you have me back on the show next year and I'll tell you. But let me share with you something that I'm very proud of. The father-son trip that we put together is designed by 2 of our members who are exceptional men. One of them is quite a mountaineer. He's quite an adventurer with a big track record of being in nature. And then another guy takes people on trips around the world. So what he does, he leads these and has for decades. Had a big mountain biking company, sold it, had a big exit. It was just really cool. 2 amazing Front Row Dad brothers who got together and said, we're going to do this as a gift to Front Row Dads. We're going to design the event. I was not involved in the design process, and I signed up as an attendee to go on this event, and I want to be surprised. So this is the year that we've launched it, and it was designed by 2 of our brothers, and I'll be going for the first time.
So can you give us more details, like where is it and what are you guys going to be doing? I mean, I know since you didn't design it, you don't know everything.
Yeah. Well, I literally don't know much, but I'm gonna show you, or I'm not gonna show you, but I'm gonna read something as I talk with you, because we have a page which anybody could go to, frontrowdads.com/events, and And on that page, we have all of our events. So I'm actually curious myself what it says. Here it is: a shared experience focused on one-to-one time with your teenager while also supporting them in a physically challenging environment. And it is in the Grand Canyon. That's what I know.
Oh, hey, maybe you
How
guys
about
are
that?
doing rim to rim or something like that.
Could possibly be, man.
Good.
I'm literally buying tickets and showing up and excited to be with these other men. You know, excited for community. And Johnny, one thing I'll share with you that I think is so important about this is early on in my fatherhood journey, I thought that all of what I was going to learn was how I could be a better dad and teach my kids more, right? Listen to my kids, share better stories, take them on better adventures. What could I do to be a better father? What I underestimated and is so valuable is the thought of who can I put my kids around? What other men? And I call that the 100 uncles approach. Could I have 100 uncles in their lives and build relationships between other great men and my children? Like could that could be potentially the greatest dad gift I ever give.
Hi, this is Melanie McCallan. Josh and I are just so grateful for the many investors who have already joined us at Accountable Equity. Accountable Equity is so much more than a capital group. It's really a community of accredited investors that want to learn and grow together. I just want to personally invite you, if you want to find out more about this type of investment and see if it's right for you and your family, please visit us at accountableequity.com.
Hey, it's Hal Elrod, author of The Miracle Morning, and you're listening to Capital Hacking. Enjoy.
Even more so than, hey, I wrote him a letter, I said the right things, I put him in the right school. Could I surround them with 100 great uncles?
Dude, I tell you, that idea right there is a mind bender. And I have been so blessed to have friends like yourself and so many other great men that, you know, my kids can look to and say, wow, you know, look what they're doing. They can look up to them. They can meet their kids, and their kids are also high performers. And, you know, that is such a neat thought process. And I love and appreciate that. And that's going to lead me to the next question, which is, you do 4 live events annually. Do you move them around, and what is the landscape for that?
Yeah, we do. We have our big event here in Austin that has been historically in Austin at every year. So that's early December, frontrowdads.com/live. Probably 130 to 150 guys will get together for 3 days in Austin. We have 2 of our VIP retreats. These are for the most committed men, the ones who've been here for the longest, who choose to step up and engage at a different level. We have one in the spring and one in the fall. And we have a summer event that's open to everybody called the Summer Summit, which is in Colorado in June. And so guys will show up to that for 3 days and they'll do the deep work. And then at that event in June, often they can fly their families in. And then the families can all hang out over that weekend, which is pretty cool. So 4 touch points throughout the year. And like you said, the format of those is not, I sit in a chair and I listen to somebody talk at me.
Right.
These are very interactive where, you know, we'll often bring a question to the group, give the men a chance to journal and to think about that question. And then we'll give them the chance to talk with another person one-to-one or in a small group and really dig in and uncover the wisdom from within. Like you said, the wisdom is in the room. These men all have victories, wins, habits, routines that, if given the chance to share, can make a difference in everybody's life. They've all got strategies. Even like at our very first event, our friend Jim Shields brought his concept, the family board meeting, and the guys loved it. Very simple concept. Hey, every quarter, get together with a kid, one-to-one for a couple hours. Like, not insanely complicated idea, but, you know, here's a business guy in real estate who, you know, loves his kids, wants to figure out how to be a great dad. It was a perfect example. Wrote an 80-page book that you could read in 30 minutes, sharing the idea. And that idea deeply impacted the men. That's what happens at our events. We just bring new ideas, new strategies, new concepts, and guys will get a chance to build the brotherhood that then keeps them accountable. They'll form accountability groups. Like there's one group that formed of guys who were like, man, I don't know about you, but I yell a lot at home. You know, I lose my shit. I yell at my kids. I raise my voice. I use my size and my anger and my tone and my temper to get stuff done. And I don't want to do that anymore. And so they formed an anger accountability group, and then they just shared whenever they lost their shit and how they were dealing with it and how they were managing their emotions. And I'm like, it's beautiful. They formed a hunting and fishing group. They formed a, RV group of the guys who travel the country half the year with their RVs. It's just whatever it was, men are finding these niche ways to gather. And they do that typically at these live events. They meet each other, they become buddies. And will you become friends with everybody? Of course not. Nobody does. But will you find your 5 or 10, or maybe even if you're lucky, your 20 dudes that you lock arms with and do life with for the next, number of years? Yeah, that's the goal.
And that is also, ties in with the name of our show, Capital Hacking, because it's not about, financial capital. It's really about the relationship capital that you guys are building at the Front Row Dads. And, I love that there's the special interest groups. And for those who are listening that heard Jim Shields' name, he wrote 2 books, 18 Summers and The Family Boardroom. And what Johnny was referencing is, just getting with each child individually, quarterly, for a board meeting. And that could be whatever your kid is into, by the way, not what you want them to be into. You do what they want to do. And sometimes if, you have a young kid and you may not be interested in that, but you're interested in that kid. So take the time to carve that out. What, speaking of family boardrooms, and I know your kids are getting older, what are some of the coolest family boardrooms that come to mind for you, John, that you've done?
Well, what really comes to mind for me is that, I spend one-to-one time with my kids all the time. It's way more than once a quarter. But I'm a super engaged father, and we're constantly doing things. But the 2 things I will tell you that I'm very proud of that we did within the last year, because I do a one-to-one trip with each kid every year. And so I took Tiger to Hawaii, and we went to Hawaii. We stayed at one of our Front Row Dad brothers' houses, who lives right on the beach, in his guest house. And we were with him for 4 or 5 days. And Tiger just got some great time driving around the island with one of our guys and meeting his kids and having dinners at their dinner table. Beautiful, right? And then we hopped over to Maui, and I did Brandon Turner's podcast, and Tiger was able to sit in the room with Brandon and his partner and ask him questions. We went to dinner with him and talked real estate and all the things. And so that's what I mean. I even wrote a post after that visit about the 100 uncles, and I thought, how many people, my son, here he is having dinner with Brandon Turner. This is a cool thing, right? And Brandon Turner is a Front Row Dad, is a great example. I'm sure you guys know Brandon from Bigger Pockets, definitely. Formerly. Yeah. And just a great human and a great dad and a great man. And so I'm really proud of that. Like that was an epic trip. And honestly, as cool as those moments were, my favorite moment with Tiger was actually just body surfing in the ocean. Nothing was happening. It was totally free. Nothing else was going on. And he and I are like laughing and body surfing in the ocean together. Yeah. And we spent 7 days, and it was beautiful. And then Ocean and I did a trip to California. We did Legoland, which is what he wanted to do. But then I took him out to Joshua Tree, and we hiked in the desert, and we stayed in an Airstream. And I took him, and we did breath work under the stars at midnight. He's 10 years old, keep in mind.
Wow.
So I hired a guide to take us into the middle of the desert, and he laid down on a blanket, and we did breath work for an hour from 11 to midnight. And it was just like, these are moments when I'm like, dude, he may not fully appreciate it now, but one day he'll grow up and be like, yeah, my dad was the type of dad to take me into the desert when I was 10 and meditate under the stars. Like, that fires me up, man. Those types of trips fire me up. But the truth is, what doesn't matter what it is. I mean, last weekend we went bike riding in downtown Austin, and we did a 10-mile bike ride, and we got, we stopped for smoothies at Juice Land, and it was a beautiful day. So it doesn't have to be taking a trip. It doesn't have to be out of state. It doesn't have to be on an airplane. But to me, it's not about what we do or where we are. It's actually, for me, how I show up. And there is a stressed out version of John, very stressed out version of John, the guy who doesn't know how to delegate well, who doesn't know how to have boundaries well, who there's never enough money, there's never enough success, there's never enough business. Like, that version of John exists. And when that version of John shows up for his kids, they feel it. My little ones will come up to me sometimes and be like, Dad, is everything okay? Like, they feel it. And then, if I can energetically be present with them, which is the goal of every father, to just really be present with your kids. A regulated nervous system, a grounded man, that's what they want and need and deserve.
Dude, that content was phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
Thank you for that. And Johnny, if our listeners want to, find you, follow up, ask questions, join Front Row Dads, how does that happen?
Yeah, frontrowdads.com is the easiest place. So I recommend listening to the podcast for a couple episodes, see if it feels good. And if it does, then you can go apply to be in the group on the website. It's not for everybody. It's really not. But if somebody hears family men with businesses, not businessmen with families, usually they're like, that I want to look into. That one sentence sums it up. So if you're an ass kicker out there who wants to win in family as much as you want to win in business, then it may be a group that can serve you. But the other thing I want to say is that while I'm very proud of our group, and if it's a good fit for somebody, awesome, there's also a lot of great groups. So if you don't find ours, find a group. Find a group of men, find a brother, lock arms, do life together, whatever it is. You don't have to pay for it. You can do it for free. But if you want somebody to help you organize some of those events and do a little of the admin work for you, then yeah, paying to be part of a community and sharing in those responsibilities may be a good thing for somebody. So frontrowdads.com for all the stuff.
You articulated that so well. I love that. Sharing in those administrative responsibilities is why you come to community. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John. It's been powerful.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it, man. It was good to hang with you and Johnny Edwin. Always, brother. Yeah. I look at you and I have so many great memories and so many great times, dude. I've stood in your home. I've watched you dad. I've watched you lead. I've watched you serve. I've watched you do it as a man of faith and a man of great love. I love how you honor your family. I love how you see your children. Every human who's blessed enough to be in your presence is a fortunate soul. Thank you so much for being my friend, John, for so many years.
Thank you, brother. Takes one to know one.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Damn straight. We just got we got to the end of another great show. And everyone listening right now, you're the family and friends. Thanks for staying till the end.
That was so fun. And hey, hit the like, hit subscribe. We're here to serve you guys. That's why we're doing this show. Josh is not paying me. I'm doing this off of my quote unquote sweat equity because we want to make a difference in your life. And then that ripple effect will continue to touch the world.
Hey, amen, brother. Please check us out on capitalhacking.com, all the social media threads. And yes, I know you've probably already sent this episode to one of your best friends. Thank you. We love you. Just go right into your iPhone, hit the plus symbol. We'll talk to you later. See you next week.
Share.